I could be wrong about this issue. When I started pastoring 35 years ago or so, there was a question that I have since then considered and wrestled with so many times. I can't even begin to tell you. And every time I end up with the same conclusion, even though most of the leaders in the modern day church seem to disagree with my position. I'm going to tell you what that is, but first I need to tell you a story. Last week I talked about how when I was 19 and I ended up in the jungles of South America in the Amazon basin. And I was in a little village called Arajuno, and you had to fly, well, you could walk in, but it was like 8-hour walk or run, more of a run. You had to fly in a little plane to get there. And the airfields, there was missionaries scattered all over that region, and they were all serviced with little short airstrips. And the organization that served them was called MAF, Missionary Aviation Fellowship. And Missionary Aviation Fellowship, I believe, started after World War II with some pilots that just wanted to minister and ended up developing that ministry of flying into the bush. And in this little village, they were ministering to Quechuas, but they were the jungle Quechuas. There's two kind of generalities of Quechua Indians. There's the mountain Quechuas. They're the ones you see in the shopping malls playing the little whistles and things and strings. These people were in the jungle, and they didn't play the little whistles and things. They shot things with blowguns. And they were incredibly accurate with blowguns. I collected butterflies while I was there. I used to pay the kids to bring me exotic butterflies. And one day, one of the children bought me this huge butterfly. It was about this big, blue. I think it was one of the big, large blue ones. And it had a blowgun dart through it. And the claim was that her father had shot it out of the air. I can't verify that, but it wouldn't have surprised me. Anyway, one day, one of these Quechua men, an older guy, he's probably in his mid-40s, but he's an old man. He came and he was real excited. Early in the morning, he came and knocked on the door, and he told Danielle, the missionary that I was staying with, that there were pigs sighted nearby, and invited me to go with him to go find a pig. I thought, this sounds like a great adventure. He says, but we're going to have to run. So, I'm 20 years old, you're 40, go ahead, do your best. So we take off, we jog across the airstrip into the jungle. Now, from the air, the jungle looks like this carpet. When you get underneath the canopy, it's not like that. It's like this. And they're not very high hills, but they are really steep. And so he's running, I'm following him. We go up, it's probably 50 feet up this first hill, down to the next gully, up the second hill, and he's just, doing just fine. And by the time I get to about to the top of the second hill, I am just about to die. I can hardly breathe. And he turns around, he looks at me, he's not even panting. And he's motioning me, come on, the pigs are getting away. And I said, yeah, they are. And I'm going to die here in the jungles of Ecuador. Needless to say, we kept trying, but finally it became apparent that I wasn't going to catch any pigs. And so we're, the two of us, out there in the middle of the jungle, and he doesn't speak a word of English, speaks Spanish somewhat poorly, and I know maybe 4 words in Spanish, and even those I don't pronounce correctly. And so we're standing there looking at each other, and he's trying to come up with a plan and suggest this plan to me. And I pick out a couple words like river and Danielle and house and this and that, and I'm just looking there. I had no clue that's what he was talking about or what he wanted to do. That experience, that sort of moment of trying to catch my breath and trying to understand and feeling badly for him, but trying to comprehend what it was that he wanted me to do, sometimes mirrors how I feel in understanding God's plan for my life. There's this sense that I have no idea what you're saying or what you're talking about or what I'm supposed to do or where I'm supposed to go or what. It's just all so confusing. So I want to talk to you this morning about discovering God's plan for your life. In 2002, I think it was, Rick Warren wrote a book called The Purpose-Driven Life, and probably a lot of you have read that. By 2007, it had sold 30 million copies, literally all over the world. So it's obviously something that people are interested in. It's obviously something that people are passionate about. They want to know why you're here. What's the purpose of my existence? There has to be something deeper, more meaningful than just living life and just playing here on this planet for however long. So I want to make some suggestions to you on how to just sort out God's purpose for your life. And I want to do it in looking at the life of Peter. And Peter, where I want to take up is after the resurrection. And Peter is on the shores of the lake, the Sea of Galilee with Jesus. And Jesus has just made a little dinner there for them. And Peter actually had gone back to fishing. And he and his friends, they were lost. They had no idea what they wanted to do. And they just simply went back and decided to go fishing. And Jesus pulls them out of the boat, brings them onto the shore. And then I want to read this account to you and then make some observations about it. It's in John 21, but you can just listen. When they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you were dressed yourself, you went where you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Because of this, the rumor spread among the believers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you?" There's a number of things in there that I think are helpful to us. And part of the journey that Peter took was a journey of truly understanding who he was. And I think part of understanding God's purpose for you and for your life is really understanding who you are. And that's not something that you will figure out by the time you're 20 or the time you're 25 or maybe even by the time that you're 40. But it is part of the process of learning why you're here and why God made you. In your bulletin today, I included a little sheet of 35 strengths. There's an organization called, well, you've heard of probably the Gallup organization. They do Gallup polls. And they created a test called Strength Finder. And there's a lot of religious organizations that actually use this. A lot of businesses use this as well to help people find their strengths. And so I thought, well, I'll just print this off and look at it. You can sometime other than right now look at it. And it might be helpful to you to say, yeah, this relates to me, this doesn't. If you want to take the test, I think it's $15. I don't know, you might be able to do it on your own. I also included a couple of websites there. The second website actually goes through and expands on each of the strengths quite a bit, so you can sort of read through them and sort of maybe help yourself understand these are the areas that I see myself strong in. And I think those things are helpful, but not entirely themselves. I think there's more information that you need. And one of the principles in discovering God's plan, I think, is understanding the journey that God has taken you on to this point. Peter started out his life as a fisherman, and there were a lot of things that he learned that were helpful to him as a fisherman later on in his ministry working with people. In fact, Jesus, when he first called him, he said, I'm going to take you and teach you how to use your fishing ability to reach people. I'm going to make you a fisher of men. So you look back in your life and you say, I've done some ridiculous jobs, and maybe some of you are in ridiculous jobs now. And I want to say that those jobs have a purpose, that God put you in those jobs. They may not be your ultimate purpose, but oftentimes God leaves you in a position to teach you something that you're going to need when you get to the place where your purpose is. I've done all kinds of strange things. I worked for many years as the head of a cattle ranch. And I did all the haying, took care of the cattle, we branded the cattle, took care of vaccinations, and we cleaned out the barns. And shoveling manure is not like being a pastor. Well, maybe sometimes. But, you know, I look back and I say, why did God lead me into that place? I've worked in retail. I've done door-to-door sailing of products, if you can believe that, as an introvert. Wasn't very successful, but I did it. And so, you know, all of those things God used to mold my character and to shape me to his purpose. And the same thing was true of Peter. God took him through those places in his life and those experiences to begin to prepare him for the place that he ultimately is going to be. Now, the other thing that I think is very curious, or one other thing about Peter, is that, Jesus was 30 when he started his ministry. You know, and it seems to me, there's not very many of us that are gods in this room. It seems to me that if God himself waited until he was 30, we shouldn't be too impatient to figure out where it is that God's taking us. And for a lot of us, for a lot of you, you may be in your 40s before you ultimately figure out exactly why I'm here. Another thing that's important about Peter is that you see that his purpose changes. For the rest of his life, it changes. It's not always the same. And God's purpose for you today may not be the purpose that he has for you tomorrow. You see Peter at this moment with Jesus, and he's confused. He has no idea what to do. And then you move into Acts. They go through this incredible encounter, and he is transformed into an evangelist. But that's not where his transformation ends. Because he's going along just fine, building the church in Jerusalem, and suddenly he finds himself at the house of Cornelius. And everything changes. What he thought was his purpose suddenly it's expanded. It's in a whole new area. I think that you can begin to feel like you're experiencing the purpose of God when you realize that you have the heart of God for his planet and for people. And when your job has to do with redemption, when your job has to do with reclamation, when your job has to do with bringing people to God and bringing the planet back to wholeness, and you begin to finally say, yeah, this is why I was made. And this is why all those things happened in my life to bring me to this particular place. Now let me talk to you about the question. About 150 years ago, modern society entered into the Industrial Revolution. And shortly after that, the church began to mimic a lot of the things that the Industrial Revolution was doing. And they began to format the church with a business approach. And the business of the church was to bring people to the church, was to build the church. And so if your goal and objective was to increase attendance, was to draw people from the community in and make your church larger. For some of them, unfortunately, the end was finances. And some kingdoms were built with financial principles, with business principles in order to increase finances. And finances, I think, are very important. I think that it is important that every follower of Jesus Christ tithe. I just believe that's true. I think that you should be giving 10%. I don't think that you should wait until you can afford to give 10%. I think you should just do it. But I don't think that's what we're about. I think that's an evidence of your spiritual growth. I think the reason that we ask people to do that is because that stretches them and requires them to trust God in ways that they weren't able to before. And it's not a business plan. There's some churches that have said, if you give 10%, God will make you even richer. And I think, well, that's so egocentric and so warped. It's not what it's about at all. So money is important. It's important that we be givers, but not because of the money itself, but because it's a signal that we trust God and we depend upon him. So the question is then, what ultimately is the purpose of the church? Why are we here? What is the reason that we're here? And I have to say that there are a lot of churches that have the business plan that how you evaluate your success is to how many people are in your congregation. And I'm very careful not to be critical of that. And I also need to say is that just because I see things differently doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a wrong view because they are sincere people. I love a lot of those guys, and they believe this is how God is leading them. And I have to say, just what Jesus said to Peter, whatever I say to him has nothing to do with you. How I lead John has nothing to do with you. So in my understanding of answering the question may be different than how other people answer the question. But my answer to the question is the number of people in my church doesn't matter. I was at a conference just last week and sitting down a friend of mine who I don't see very often, maybe a couple times a year. And his question was, well, how many people do you have on a Sunday morning? And I bit my tongue because what I often say is I have between 2,000 and 3,000. And then I say, well, it's closer to 2, but it's between 2,000 and 3,000. But I didn't say that to him. But that's just the very first question that pastors ask when they get together. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten together with pastors. They say, hey, how large is your congregation? And to them, that is a sign of spirituality. That's how you equate it. Every year I have to fill out a report to my denomination. The questions they want to know is, how many people are here on a Sunday morning? How many people are in Sunday school? How many people are in youth group? And service looks like this. And I hate doing those reports, but again, I have to remind myself, Peter and John. I'm not responsible for John. I'm responsible for Peter. How I would fill out the report. Let me tell you how I answer the question and how I would design a report if I was designing it. I would say, what kinds of amazing things have God done in your church in this past year? What kinds of creative and unusual ways have you able to contact and engage the community? What kinds of things have you discovered about your ability to minister overseas? What kinds of ways are you reaching people in other countries? What kind of programs do you have to help refugees? And I would not ask any questions about numbers because, in my opinion, the way I answer the question, they're irrelevant. Jesus said, and I think the way I answer the question, we get this wrong because we look at the Great Commission and we say, go into all the world, but I think there's a Great Commission before the Great Commission. And I think the Great Commission is that we need to love God and love people. Everything after that is how we go about doing that. Love God and love people. And I think the true way that you evaluate a church is how it is doing that. Loving God and loving people. And let me say this carefully, but in some ways, I believe that if you had a choice, if you had a really busy weekend and you only had an hour to give, it would be more spiritual for you to be splitting firewood to be new worship here on Sunday morning. I think it would be more spiritual for you to be picking up litter on the highway than to be worshiping here on Sunday morning. I think it'd be more spiritual for you to have breakfast with your neighbors than to be here on Sunday morning. Now, I say that somewhat nervously because I don't want to come next Sunday and none of you are here. But I think the point of this service isn't to say that we are true followers of Jesus Christ. I think that is. I think this is to prepare us for that. And that when we come here and we connect to God, it isn't because this is the highlight. It isn't because this is the epitome. It isn't because God says, oh, I'm so happy everybody's in church on a Sunday morning. We should be here because I need to be recharged because my week was so exciting. I was talking to people at work. I was reclaiming plastic. I was rescuing dogs. I don't know what God's calling you to do, but this should be the place where you come back and talk about what's happening out there. It's not about this, as important as this is. I say those things, and I don't in any way want any of you to feel guilty that you weren't here at the Splitwood or yesterday or whatever. It doesn't matter to me. I show up and I do it and I look around. Honestly, I'm truly honest with you about this. I don't care if you're there or not. I'm there because I need to be there. And my role as your pastor is to provide you with opportunities to serve and to find creative ways and to expose you to places and to stretch you so that you do those things. If God leads you to do other things, that's great. But you need to be doing something. There has to be something in your life that you're doing that's not just simply about you. And honestly, on Sunday morning, this is a lot about just you. You're here to become refreshed, to connect with each other, to encourage, to connect with God again. But there has to be something beyond that. And that's where you begin to shine. And that's where you begin to find your purpose. Your purpose won't be in here. It's going to be out there. Again, I may be answering this wrong. I am very careful not to be critical. God has rebuked me many, many times that those people out there are not, they're the Johns, and God can talk to John however he wants. I'm Peter. I need to be obedient to him. This is how he has molded and shaped me, and this is who I am. And this is how I want to lead you. But you need to understand that we live in a culture that doesn't see it that way. And that's okay for them. But I believe God has led us on a different path to be different people, to express him in that particular way. So when you leave here, I hope that you don't think this is the epitome, that this is the peak, that this is the climax, that this is the epitome of your faith. I hope you leave here with a sense of, now I'm ready. Now I can go out the door. Now I can start to find out where my purpose is and why I'm here. I'm not here for this. This prepares me for that. Stand up and let me pray for you.